was on a long road trip, driving alone through a stretch of highway that seemed to go on forever. The kind of road where the radio barely picks up stations, where the only thing you hear is the steady hum of your tires on asphalt and the occasional rush of wind when a truck speeds past in the opposite lane. I had been driving for hours, my body aching from sitting so long, my eyes heavy with fatigue. The sun had already begun to set, casting long shadows over the empty road, and I knew I needed to stop soon. I still had a couple of hours before reaching my motel for the night, but I needed gas, a snack, and a break from the monotony of the drive. That's when I saw it, a small gas station in the middle of nowhere, its neon sign flickering weakly. The kind of place that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for a single beat-up sedan near the side of the building. The station itself was attached to one of those old-fashioned convenience stores, the type that sold everything from cheap coffee to motor oil to dusty souvenirs that no one ever bought. I pulled into a spot near the entrance, stretching my arms as I cut the engine. The air was eerily still, no wind, no sounds of distant traffic, just the hum of the buzzing overhead lights and the occasional chirp of crickets in the nearby fields. As I stepped out of my car, I felt a strange unease, like I was being watched. I brushed it off, chalking it up to exhaustion and paranoia from being alone on the road too long. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. Inside, the gas station was dead silent. The only person in sight was the cashier, a hunched-over man in his 60s with a thick mustache, flipping through a magazine behind the counter. He barely looked up as I walked in, mumbling something under his breath before turning the page. I made my way to the coolers in the back, grabbing a bottle of water and a small snack. The aisles were narrow and poorly lit, casting long shadows that made the place feel even more abandoned. I was halfway to the register when I noticed them. Two men. They were standing near the refrigerated section, huddled too close together, whispering in low voices. They didn't have anything in their hands, weren't looking at any of the products, just standing there, talking. Something about them made me uneasy. I glanced at them quickly, trying not to make eye contact, but I could feel their eyes on me. As I approached the counter, I could hear the shuffle of footsteps behind me. A slow, deliberate movement. I pretended to ignore it, but my skin crawled. By the time I reached the register, the men were standing directly behind me in line. Too close. Not normal, waiting in line close. Closer. So close that I could feel their breath, hot and damp, on the back of my neck. My body went rigid. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I forced myself to stay calm, to act like I hadn't noticed. The old cashier didn't react at all. He rang up my things with the same sluggish pace, flipping through the buttons on the register with disinterest. I handed him a bill, and as he counted out my change, I chanced to glance at the security mirror mounted on the corner of the ceiling. The reflection showed the two men staring directly at me. The taller one was thin, with dark, slicked-back hair and sunken eyes. The other was shorter, stockier, with a jagged scar running down his jawline. Neither of them blinked. Then, one of them muttered something under his breath. The other chuckled. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was low, knowing, like they were in on a secret I wasn't part of. I didn't understand the language they were speaking, but the tone sent a chill through me. I grabbed my change, muttered a quick, thanks, and turned toward the door, forcing myself to walk at a steady pace. I could hear them moving behind me. I pushed open the door, stepping outside into the warm night air, heart hammering. My car was parked just a few feet away, but in that moment, the distance felt too far. I picked up my pace, reaching into my bag for my keys, ready to unlock the door and get the hell out of there. Then, hey, a woman's voice. I turned. There was a woman standing by her car, just a few feet from mine. She was in her 40s, dressed casually, holding a set of keys in her hand. She looked right at me, her expression calm but knowing. "Are you okay?" she asked. She knew. She had seen them too. I hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, just looking for something in my bag." She nodded back and stepped a little closer. It wasn't just small talk. She was putting herself between me and them. From the corner of my eye, I saw the two men had stopped walking. They were standing just outside the gas station door, watching us. Their smirks were gone. They stood there for a few seconds, then, just like that, they turned around and walked back inside. As if they had lost interest. As if my sudden lack of isolation had ruined something for them. The woman waited until they were fully inside before speaking again. "They were following you," she said softly. I exhaled, my hands still trembling. I thought I was imagining it, I admitted. She shook her head. "No. The way they were watching you? That wasn't normal." I thanked her more than once. If she hadn't been there, if she hadn't spoken up, I probably would have gotten into my car, unaware, and who knows what would have happened. I climbed into my car and immediately locked the doors. As I backed out of the parking lot, I stole one last glance at the gas station window. The two men were still watching me. They weren't smirking anymore. They weren't pretending to be distracted. They just stared. I didn't stop driving for the next hour. Didn't even pull over to check my phone. I just kept going until the gas station was far behind me. That night, as I lay in my motel bed, I replayed the whole thing in my head, over and over. What would have happened if that woman hadn't been there? What were those men planning? I would never know. And honestly, I don't want to. I was 11 years old when I learned that monsters aren't just in movies. They walk among us, blending in, waiting for the right moment. And I almost didn't get away. It was a normal afternoon, a little after 5 p.m. I had just finished hanging out at my friend Ryan's house, where we spent hours playing video games and stuffing our faces with chips. I remember my mom texting me to remind me to be home by dinner, and I texted back, on my way now. I had walked this route home 100 times. Our neighborhood was safe, quiet, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and let their kids play outside until the streetlights came on. I wasn't afraid. I had no reason to be. The walk home was simple, for blocks down, across the small park, and straight to my house. The sun was still up, but it was getting lower in the sky, casting that warm golden glow over everything. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass, and the distant sound of someone mowing their lawn filled the air. And then I passed the alleyway. It was the kind of place you don't usually notice, just a narrow gap between two brick buildings filled with dumpsters and overgrown weeds. I had passed it 100 times before and never once paid attention. But that day, something felt different. I wasn't even looking in that direction, but out of nowhere, I heard it. A soft shuffle, like someone stepping forward and then hesitating. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious, but it was deliberate. I slowed down, my heart skipping a beat. And then I saw him. A man was leaning against the brick wall, half hidden in the alley shadow. At first glance, he didn't look scary. He wasn't some old, creepy stranger. He looked young, maybe late teens or early 20s. His hoodie was too big for him, his jeans ripped at the knees, his shoes dirty and worn. His dark, messy hair stuck to his forehead, like he had been sweating. But something about him was off. His body language, the way he stood too still, the way he was already looking at me when I noticed him. It made my skin crawl. "Hey, kid." His voice was too casual, like he had been waiting for me. Every single instinct in my body screamed, "Keep walking." I didn't answer. I gripped the straps of my backpack and sped up, but I barely made it a few steps before. "Hey, wait a sec." His voice was sharper this time, more urgent. I stopped. I shouldn't have stopped. I turned my head slightly, not wanting to be rude, but also feeling that tight, uneasy sensation in my gut. "You know where Maple Street is?" Maple Street was literally 2 blocks away. I could see the street sign from where I was standing. That's when the warning bells in my head started screaming. He knew where Maple Street was. Everyone in this neighborhood did. He was testing me. Yeah," I said, my voice hesitant. "It's just that way." I pointed down the road, my fingers trembling slightly. The man took a step forward. "Can you show me?" Something in his tone shifted. It wasn't a request. It was a trap. I shook my head quickly. "I have to get home." I turned to leave. And then, a sharp, searing pain exploded in the back of my head. I barely understood what was happening. 1 second, I was standing there. The next, everything blurred. My knees buckled, my vision spotted with white, and I stumbled forward. My body was trying to catch up, but my brain was still spinning. Then, a rough, sweaty hand clamped over my mouth. I couldn't scream. I couldn't breathe. I felt myself being yanked backward, my backpack cutting into my shoulders as the man pulled me into the alley. My body went into pure panic mode. I started kicking, thrashing, twisting in his grip. But he was stronger than me. My feet scraped against the pavement, my sneakers skidding against the ground as I tried to dig in. My lungs burned, my heartbeat slammed against my chest. "Stop moving," he hissed in my ear, his voice full of frustration. I tried to scream through his hand, but it barely came out, a muffled, desperate noise. I did the only thing I could think of. I bit down, hard. His sweaty, calloused palm was against my mouth, and I sank my teeth into his skin with everything I had. The taste of salt and copper filled my mouth. He yelled in pain and yanked his hand away, just for a second. And in that second, I screamed as loud as I could. Help! The sound bounced off the alley walls, echoing down the street. For a split second, everything froze. Then, a voice. Hey! The grip on me loosened instantly. I turned my head, and relief crashed into me like a tidal wave. Mr. Peterson, our neighbor. He was sprinting toward us, his face red with fury, his fist clenched. The man let go of me completely, shoving me to the ground before taking off. I hit the pavement hard, my arms scraping against the rough ground. But I didn't care. I gasped for air, my whole body shaking. Mr. Peterson didn't even stop. He kept running, chasing after my attacker. I heard footsteps pounding against the concrete, then voices shouting, cursing. More people were coming outside, neighbors stepping onto their porches, looking down the street. I sat there, stunned, shaking, my heart beating so fast it hurt. Someone, a woman, knelt beside me. Are you okay? What happened? I tried to speak, but my voice didn't work. Minutes later, I heard the distant sound of sirens. By the time the police arrived, my attacker was gone. I went home that night with bruises on my ribs, a splitting headache, and a shaking body that wouldn't stop trembling. A week later, my mom got a call. They found him, and he had done this before. The police linked him to multiple attacks on kids in the area, kids who hadn't been as lucky as me, kids who didn't get away. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't fought back. I don't know what he had planned, but I know one thing. I never walked home alone again. I had always loved taking late-night walks. There was something calming about it. The quiet streets, the cool air, the way everything seemed to slow down. I lived in a safe suburban neighborhood, so I never really thought twice about going out alone after dark. It was something I had done 100 times before. But after that night, I never walked alone again. It was early fall, just chilly enough that I had thrown on a hoodie before heading out. I wasn't planning on going far, just a few blocks, maybe down to the small park near my house. I had my headphones in, music playing, completely relaxed as I walked through the dimly lit streets. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A man. He was on the opposite side of the street, walking parallel to me. At first, I barely noticed him. People walked at night all the time, and he was far enough away that I didn't think much of it. He was bald, wearing dark clothes, carrying something, a large black plastic bag in each hand. I kept walking. So did he. A few houses later, I glanced over again. He was still there, still walking at the exact same pace as me. The weird thing was, he wasn't carrying the bags anymore. I frowned, slowing my steps slightly. My first thought was that maybe he had thrown them away, but there weren't any trash cans nearby. Had he just dropped them? A cold, uneasy feeling crept over me. I turned my music down, leaving just one earbud in, and kept walking, a little faster now. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow. Measured. Someone was following me. I didn't dare turn around right away. My stomach was twisting, my pulse quickening. It could be nothing. Maybe someone else was out for a walk. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But I needed to be sure. I picked up my pace, walking toward the next intersection. There was a street light ahead, and if I could get under it, I could take a quick glance behind me without making it obvious. As I stepped into the light, I turned my head slightly, just enough to see over my shoulder. He was there. The same bald man, and he didn't have the bags anymore. I felt my chest tighten. My skin went ice cold. He wasn't on the other side of the street anymore. He was on my side now, and he was closer. I turned my gaze forward, pretending I hadn't noticed, pretending my heart wasn't slamming against my ribs. This was wrong. This wasn't just someone walking home. He had switched sides of the street. He had closed the distance. I had to think. My house was still a few blocks away. If I ran for it, would he chase me? If I kept walking, would he try to get even closer? Then I realized something that made my blood run cold. There were no cars passing by, no people outside, no houses with their porch lights on. I was completely alone. I reached into my hoodie pocket, gripping my phone tightly. My hands were sweating, but I forced myself to stay calm. Call someone. Now. I pulled up my roommate's number, keeping my phone low and hidden as I pressed call. It rang once, twice. Pick up. Please, pick up. On the third ring, she answered. Hello. I tried to sound casual. Hey, yeah, I'll be home in a few minutes. Can you meet me outside? There was a pause. Yeah? What? I could hear the confusion in her voice, but I didn't have time to explain. Please, just meet me outside, okay?" I hung up before she could ask anything else. Then, without warning, I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop to see if he was chasing me. I just ran, as fast as I could, cutting across yards, taking a shortcut through an alley, my lungs burning, my heart hammering so hard I thought I was going to pass out. I didn't stop until I saw my house. And my roommate. She was standing in the driveway, holding her phone, looking at me with wide, confused eyes. "What the hell is going on?" she asked. I turned around for the first time. He was gone. I scanned the street, my breath coming in gasps, my whole body shaking. No sign of him. No shadow in the distance. Nothing. There was a guy. I panted. Following me. He was carrying bags. Then he wasn't. I don't know where he went. She looked past me, frowning. "Are you sure?" "Yes." We stood there in silence for a few moments, both of us staring into the dark, waiting to see if he would appear again. He didn't. That night, I barely slept. Every noise outside made me flinch. Every shadow seemed too dark, too long. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. So I went back. I walked the same route, but this time in daylight. And when I reached the spot where I had first seen him, I felt sick. The bags. They were still there. 2 large, black garbage bags, half hidden in the weeds at the edge of the alleyway. I shouldn't have done it, but I stepped closer, and I saw it. One of the bags had split open slightly. Something was inside. Something thick, dark, and wet. Something that smelled rotten. My stomach lurched. I turned and ran home again, this time straight to my phone. I called the police. They came. They checked. And then they told me something I wish I had never heard. "Ma'am, these aren't just trash bags." I felt my throat close up. "What do you mean?" The officer gave me a long, steady look. "We need to investigate further. But from what we can tell, there's something wrapped inside these bags." I could barely breathe. "Something?" I echoed. "A body." I never went on another late-night walk again. I had been dealing with migraines for weeks. They weren't just small headaches either. These were the kind that made my vision blur, made bright lights unbearable, and left me feeling like my skull was being squeezed in a vice. I had tried everything, cutting down on caffeine, drinking more water, even taking painkillers that barely made a dent. When my regular doctor finally referred me to an eye specialist, I felt relieved. Maybe it was something simple, something glasses or eye drops could fix. But I had no idea that this appointment would haunt me for the rest of my life. The clinic was in a small, rundown strip mall on the edge of town. The kind of place that had once been bustling but now sat half abandoned, with faded store signs and dimly lit parking lots. When I pulled in, there were only 2 other cars in the lot. One was a beat-up sedan with a dented door, the other a white van with no windows. Something about that unsettled me. It was almost 7:30 p.m. I thought it was weird that an eye clinic would be open so late, but I shrugged it off. Inside, the place felt off immediately. The walls were painted in ugly, faded blue. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting an eerie glow over the waiting area. There were no other patients, just a bored-looking receptionist sitting behind the desk, flipping through a magazine. "You're the last appointment," she muttered without looking up. She shoved a clipboard toward me. I filled out my information quickly, my fingers tightening around the pen as I felt a strange sense of unease settle over me. It was too quiet in here. No sound of other doctors, no distant conversations, no phone ringing. Just the faint hum of a vending machine and the scratching of the receptionist's pen as she wrote something down. Then, the door leading to the exam rooms creaked open, and he stepped out. Dr. Heller. The moment I saw him, a strange chill ran down my spine. He was tall, thin, and almost unnaturally pale. His wire-framed glasses rested too perfectly on his face, and his gray hair was combed neatly, almost too neatly, like he took hours to style it every morning. But what really disturbed me was his smile. It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. It was practiced. "Come in," he said, tilting his head slightly. I swallowed hard and followed him inside. The exam room was colder than the rest of the office. The second I stepped in, I felt a noticeable drop in temperature, like the air conditioning was turned up too high. The equipment looked outdated. A dusty vision chart hung on the wall, and the machines looked like they hadn't been upgraded in years. The only thing that seemed new was the reclining exam chair in the center of the room. "So," Dr. Heller said, flipping through my forms. "Migraines." I nodded. "Yeah, they've been happening for a few weeks." My doctor thought it might be vision-related. He nodded, adjusting his glasses. Let's take a look. He turned off the lights, leaving only the dim glow of his equipment. Lean in. I placed my chin on the cold metal rest. And then he moved closer. Too close. His breath was just inches from my skin as he adjusted the dials. I tried to stay still, but I could feel his gaze lingering on me for a second too long. Then his thumb brushed against my cheek. It was quick, barely noticeable, but I felt it. I flinched. He didn't pull away immediately. He let his hand linger, as if testing something. Then, finally, he stepped back. "You have very interesting eyes," he murmured. My stomach twisted. Thanks." He smiled. That same, unnatural smile. The exam continued, but my whole body felt tense. I just wanted to leave. "Almost done," he said after a few more tests. "One last thing." He turned to a small cabinet, opening it slowly, methodically. I watched as he pulled out a pin light, his fingers wrapping around it too tightly. "Follow the light with your eyes." I nodded, sitting still. The light moved left to right, up and down. Then his other hand landed on my thigh. I froze. It was subtle, just a light touch, barely there, but his fingers pressed against my leg in a way that wasn't necessary. My pulse spiked. I wanted to move, to say something, but my brain locked up. Then, just as quickly, he pulled his hand away. "All good," he said, grinning. "You're done." I shot up from the chair, grabbing my bag instantly. "Everything looks fine," he continued. "But if you ever need another exam, don't hesitate to come back." I forced a nod, my legs already carrying me toward the door. The receptionist was gone. The waiting room was empty. I stepped into the parking lot, my breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was nothing. Then, a text popped up on my phone. "Unknown number. It was nice seeing you tonight. You have really beautiful eyes." I stopped breathing. I looked around, scanning the dark parking lot, the empty cars. No one was there, but I felt it. I wasn't alone. My hands were shaking as I typed back. "Who is this?" No response. I climbed into my car, locked the doors instantly, and drove home as fast as I could. For the next few nights, I kept checking my phone, checking my windows, checking my locks. I tried to block it out. But then, another text. "Unknown number. You should come back soon. I'd love to see you again." That time, I didn't respond. That time, I blocked the number. I never went back, and I never stopped wondering, how did he get my number? I had always been careful. I never parked in dark areas. I always kept my keys in my hand, ready to unlock my car the second I got there. I didn't wander around alone at night unless absolutely necessary. But that night, none of it mattered. I had been shopping at the outlet mall, a huge, mostly outdoor shopping center on the outskirts of town. It was one of those places where you could spend hours wandering from store to store, and I had gotten caught up browsing. By the time I stepped outside, the sun had already set. The temperature had dropped, and a cold wind cut through the parking lot, making me wish I had worn something warmer. I tightened my jacket around me, adjusting my shopping bags in my arms as I headed toward my car. That's when I noticed him. A man, standing a little too close to the entrance of the store I had just left. At first, I didn't pay much attention. The parking lot was busy, filled with people coming and going, so I assumed he was waiting for someone. But then I realized he wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't checking the time. He was staring at me. I tried not to react, but my heart picked up speed. I did a quick scan of my surroundings. There were still people around, but they were all focused on their own business, talking, laughing, unlocking their cars. I told myself I was being paranoid. Still, I adjusted my grip on my shopping bags and picked up my pace. My car was parked a few rows down, not too far from the store, but suddenly it felt too far away. I took another glance back. He was moving, not toward a store, not toward a car, toward me. I swallowed hard and kept walking, forcing myself to act natural. But my hands were sweating. My pulse was racing. I was almost to my car now. Just a few more steps. Then, I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me. I didn't turn around. Instead, I did something my mom had taught me when I was younger, something she always drilled into my head for situations like this. I pretended I had forgotten something. I slowed my pace, then suddenly turned around and started walking back toward the store, as if I had just remembered an item I needed. And that's when I saw him. He was closer than I thought. Too close. When I turned around, he stopped in his tracks. He hesitated for a second, just a fraction of a second, before quickly pretending like he was just looking at something in his pocket. But it was too late. I saw his face. He knew. I knew. This wasn't a coincidence. I locked eyes with him for a brief moment, my stomach twisting into knots. Then, without missing a beat, I walked straight past him, back toward the store. My heart was hammering. I stepped inside and walked toward the nearest employee. Hey, this is probably nothing, but I think someone might be following me. The cashier, a teenage girl who looked barely old enough to drive, blinked at me, confused. What? There's a guy outside. I saw him near the entrance earlier, and then he followed me to my car. I could see the doubt in her eyes, but before she could say anything, a shadow passed the glass doors. I turned, my stomach dropping. He was still there. He had stopped just outside the store, standing near the display window, pretending to look at something inside. But his eyes weren't on the display. They were on me. The employee must have seen my expression change because she suddenly looked uneasy. Okay, do you want me to call security? I nodded quickly. She grabbed the store phone and started dialing. Meanwhile, I kept my eyes glued to the glass. For a moment, the man just stood there, watching. Then, as if sensing something was wrong, he turned away and walked off. I let out a shaky breath, but I didn't feel relieved. He wasn't running. He wasn't panicking. He was just walking away calmly, like he had all the time in the world. Like this was just a game. Like he was just going to wait for me somewhere else. Security took their time arriving. By the time they showed up, the man was long gone. They walked me to my car, checked around the lot, and assured me it was probably nothing. He was probably just a weirdo, one of them said with a shrug. These things happen. But as I sat in my locked car, gripping the steering wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That he wasn't gone. That he had just moved somewhere I couldn't see. I waited until security left before pulling out of the parking lot. As I drove, I kept checking my mirrors. Looking for him. Waiting. Nothing. By the time I got home, I had almost convinced myself that I had overreacted. That's when my phone buzzed. A notification. Someone had sent me a friend request on Facebook. I frowned, unlocking my phone. The profile had no picture, just a blank gray silhouette. No posts. No friends. And the name. Nice seeing you 92. My stomach turned. I clicked on the profile. There was nothing there. No info, no pictures, no history. But the account had been created today. I stared at the name, my blood turning ice cold. Nice seeing you. My hand shook as I blocked the account, but it didn't matter. I didn't sleep that night. Because I knew. Somewhere out there, he was still watching me.